The Mitsubishi 3000 GT was supposed to be Japan's answer to Ferrari, a twin-turbo, all-wheel drive, active aero monster that would embarrass Porsches and make Corvette owners question their life choices. It had more technology than a NASA spacecraft, more presence than anything coming out of Detroit, and on paper, it should have been legendary. But instead, it's the car you forgot existed until right now. You can buy a clean VR4 for less than a new Camry, and nobody's lining up to do it. So what the hell happened? How does a car with this much potential end up as a footnote in JDM history, while the Supra and GTR get all the glory? Let's rewind to 1990. Japan is on top of the world. The bubble economy is in full swing, the yen is strong, and Japanese manufacturers are convinced they can build anything better than anyone else. And honestly, they kind of could. Honda just dropped the NSX and made Ferrari nervous. Nissan brought back the GTR and made Australia ban it from racing. Toyota was gearing up to release the Supra and rewrite the tuner playbook. Mazda had the RX-7 spinning rotaries and winning hearts. This was Japan's golden era, their moment to prove they weren't just making reliable Econoboxes anymore. They were making dreams. And Mitsubishi wasn't about to sit on the sidelines watching everyone else collect trophies. Mitsubishi had been building rally legends with the Lancer Evolution and making turbo magic for years. But they didn't have a proper halo car, no flagship, no statement piece that said, "We belong at the big boy table." So in 1990, they unveiled the 3000 GT, and it was supposed to change everything. The GTO in Japan, the 3000 GT everywhere else. This thing was engineered to absolutely flex on the competition. It came with a twin-turbo 3.0-liter V6 making 300 horsepower, all-wheel drive, four-wheel steering, active aerodynamics with a spoiler that rose at speed like it was showing off, electronically controlled suspension, and even exhaust that could change its tone depending on how you drove it. This wasn't just a sports car. This was a rolling tech demo, a middle finger to everyone who said Japanese cars couldn't compete with European exotics. And it looked the part too. Wide, aggressive, low-slung with curves in all the right places. Pop-up headlights that screamed 90s cool. It had presence, real presence. When you pulled up in a 3000 GT VR4, people stopped and stared. It looked expensive because it was expensive. The VR4 launched at around $47,000 in 1991, which is over $100,000 in today's money. For context, that's more than a Corvette, more than a base 911, and only a bit less than a Super Turbo. Mitsubishi was swinging for the fences, and they wanted everyone to know it. This was their moonshot, their chance to sit at the table with the legends. But here's where things start to fall apart, because while the 3000 GT looked like a supercar and had the tech of a supercar, it didn't quite drive like one, and that's putting it politely. See, all that technology, all those computers and actuators and sensors and fancy engineering, they came at a brutal cost. Wait, the VR4 tipped the scales at a porky 3,800 pounds. Let that sink in for a second. For reference, the Supra was around 3,400 pounds. The RX-7 was a nimble 3,100. Hell, even the American Corvette was lighter. And when you're trying to be a performance car, a driver's car, weight is the enemy. It doesn't matter how much horsepower you're making if you're dragging around the equivalent of an extra refrigerator everywhere you go. And it wasn't just the weight, it was the feel, or the complete lack of it. The 3000 GT was numb, disconnected. The steering felt like you were playing a video game with the force feedback turned off. The chassis felt heavy because it was heavy. The all-wheel drive system was supposed to give it that supercar grip, that confidence-inspiring traction, but instead it just made the car feel planted in the worst way possible. Like it was glued to the road but didn't want to dance on it. It wanted to plow through corners, not carve them. The four-wheel steering was clever on paper, a genuine engineering achievement, but in practice it made the car feel unpredictable. You never quite knew what the rear end was doing, and that's not confidence-inspiring when you're pushing it hard on a back road. Compare that to the Supra, which felt alive, raw, connected to your inputs. That car wanted to be driven hard. Or the RX-7, which was a scalpel, a precision instrument that rewarded skill. The 3000 GT felt like a computer on wheels, and not in a good way. It was a car that prioritized gadgets over driving dynamics, complexity over clarity, and enthusiasts could tell immediately. Because here's the thing, car people don't care about how many acronyms are stamped on the spec sheet if the car doesn't make them smile. mile if it doesn't give them that visceral emotional connection, and the 3000 GT just didn't deliver that feeling that makes you want to drive it at 2 a.m. on a back road just because you can. Then there's the reliability, or again, the complete lack of it. All that technology, it broke a lot, and often the active aero system would fail and leave your spoiler stuck up like a dorsal fin. The four-wheel steering would go haywire and make the car crab walk down the highway. The turbos would cook themselves under sustained boost. The transmissions, especially the automatics, were grenades with a timer you couldn't see. And fixing any of it? Good luck finding parts or a mechanic who actually understood this Frankenstein's monster of Japanese over-engineering. The 3000 GT became known as the car that spent more time in the shop than on the road, more time on jack stands than at car meets, and that reputation spread fast through the community. And Mitsubishi didn't help themselves at all. They barely marketed the thing. While Toyota was throwing money at super commercials and Nissan was letting the GTR dominate racetracks and build a legend, Mitsubishi was just kind of hoping people would notice the 3000 GT sitting pretty in the showroom. They didn't race it seriously in any major series. They didn't build a tuner community around it. They didn't create a culture, a movement, a reason for people to care beyond the spec sheet. And in the 90s, culture was everything. The Supra became a tuner icon because of movies, magazines, and a passionate grassroots scene that pushed those two JZs to 1000 horsepower. The GTR was Godzilla, the unbeatable monster. The RX-7 was the drift king. The 3000 GT was just the expensive Mitsubishi that looked cool in the parking lot, but nobody could afford to keep running. Mitsubishi also made the colossal mistake of badge engineering the thing. The Dodge Stealth was essentially the same car with a different nose and slightly different trim, and it completely diluted the brand. Suddenly the 3000 GT wasn't special anymore. It wasn't exotic, it was just a rebadged Dodge sitting next to neons and caravans. And in the JDM world, that's a death sentence. You can't be a legend if you share a showroom floor with a minivan. You can't command respect if your twin is being sold at a Dodge dealership in Iowa. Sales reflected all of this. In its first year, the 3000 GT sold decently, around 8,000 units in the US, riding high on that initial hype and curiosity. But by the mid-90s, sales had absolutely cratered. Mitsubishi was lucky to move 2,000 units a year. Meanwhile, the Supra, the RX-7, even the 300ZX were moving units and building legacies that would last decades. The 3000 GT was being forgotten before it even had a chance to be remembered. And by the time Mitsubishi pulled the plug in 1999 in the US and 2000 in Japan, nobody cared. The car died quietly, without fanfare, without a proper send-off. The tuner scene had already moved on. Here's the tragedy though, the 3000 GT had genuine potential, real potential to be something special. If Mitsubishi had focused less on cramming every possible gadget and sensor into the car, and more on making it actually fun to drive, engaging, rewarding, it could have been something legendary. If they'd shaved 500 pounds with more aluminum and carbon fiber, if they'd given it sharper, more communicative steering, if they'd built a community around it, if they'd taken it racing and won, the story could have been completely different. But they didn't. They built a car that tried to do everything and ended up doing nothing particularly well. A jack of all trades, master of none. And here's where it gets really interesting for the car enthusiasts watching this. The 3000 GT's biggest failure wasn't just the weight or the numb steering or even the reliability issues, it was the platform itself. See, the Skyline GTR was built like a brick. That RB26 could handle ungodly amounts of boost with basic bolt-ons. The Supra's 2JZ became legendary because it was over-engineered from the factory and could take 1000 horsepower on stock internals. The RX-7's rotary was a tuner's playground. These cars were built with headroom, with potential, with the understanding that enthusiasts would want to push them further. They were foundations you could build on. The 3000 GT, it was engineered to its absolute limit from day one. That 6G72 twin-turbo V6 was maxed out at 300 horsepower. There was no headroom. The block couldn't handle much more boost without cracking. The all-wheel drive system couldn't transfer more power without grenading itself. The transmission was already fragile at stock power levels. Every system in the car was designed to work in perfect harmony at exactly the specifications Mitsubishi intended. And the moment you tried to to modify anything, the whole house of cards collapsed. You couldn't just bolt on a bigger turbo and tune it like you could with a Supra. You couldn't throw a stroker kit in it like the RB26. The 3000 GT was a sealed unit, a finished product that said, this is it, don't touch anything. And that's the kiss of death in tuner culture, because tuners don't want a finished product. They want a canvas, they want potential, they want to make a car their own, to push boundaries, to see how far they can take it. The 3000 GT offered none of that. It was too complex, too fragile, too expensive to modify, and the aftermarket support never materialized because nobody was buying them, and the few who did couldn't keep them running long enough to start a scene. Companies like HKS and Greddy focused their R&D on Supras and Skylines because that's where the demand was. The 3000 GT was left in the cold. Today, the 3000 GT is a cautionary tale, a reminder that specs don't matter if the soul isn't there, that technology for the sake of technology doesn't win hearts, that weight, driving feel, reliability, and modifiability matter more than a fancy brochure full of acronyms. The Supra became a legend because it was a blank canvas for tuners and had an unbreakable engine. The GTR became a legend because it won everything and could be pushed to insane limits. The RX-7 became a legend because it was pure, focused, and rewarding to drive. The 3000 GT became a footnote because it was just a really expensive, really complicated way to be disappointed. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Cars aren't just machines. They're experiences, they're emotions, they're the way they make you feel when you turn the key and the way they make others feel when you roll past. They're the community you build around them, the modifications you make, the stories you tell. The 3000 GT looked the part. It had the specs, it had the technology, but it never felt the part. It never inspired passion. It never built a culture. And in the end, that's why nobody remembers it. That's why it failed.